Welcome to the latest edition of the Recruitment Leaders Unlocked podcast. I've just had a fascinating conversation with Chris Morrow, who is the co-founder of Digitalent, an agency specialising in AI and machine learning skills. Chris has had a really interesting journey over the last 7 years or so as they've grown that agency and reacted to the bumps in the marketplace. And it's a must listen to any leader out there who wants to understand how you can grow your business and the importance of your leadership style. Chris talks about humility being his North Star as a leader, and the importance of accountability, holding his hands up when he makes a mistake in the business publicly to set the tone for other people to be able to do the same. And the importance of vision and values, not only in building the culture that you have, but when you hire staff as well. So hiring against character as much as against experience. And then finally, one of the really interesting points that Chris made was going easy on himself. There will be bumps along the way. So as a leader, he had to learn how to go easy on himself and take the time to grow and develop rather than implode as a business. And a fascinating listen. So please tune into this. You'll be able to hear our entire suite of podcasts on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as on our website at jumpadvisory.com. So I hope you enjoy the listen. Welcome to episode 6 of Recruitment Leaders Unlocked podcast with me, Martin Ewings. And today I have a guest. It's Chris Morrow, the co-founder of Digitalent, who are a AI and machine learning focused recruitment business who've been operating now for over 7 years in multiple locations around the globe. So welcome, Chris. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Martin.
It's a pleasure. And the objective of today's podcast is to understand more about Chris, how he leads his business and what he's learned from the first 7 years of running Digitalent along with his co-founder. So we'll kick straight off, Chris, and jump straight in. So first of all, your leadership principles. What has been the foundation of your success and how have you evolved those leadership principles over the last few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a long time ago before starting my business, I probably thought that leadership was sort of slightly different to the way that it should really go in practice. So what I would say is that when I started my business, even though I'd managed people in the past in Australia when I was working there, as well, it is something that's sort of like a learned skill and not just something that you're kind of born with. I mean, some people can have natural leadership abilities, but it's definitely a skill that you can learn. So I went through a big process of trying to upskill myself, certainly in the early part of when we started Digitalent and when we started hiring, our first staff, because at that time, the strategy was sort of like in my head, and we hadn't really documented it. And then when you start bringing on, the staff, they're sort of looking to you for, the vision and the guidance from a strategic perspective. So yeah, that's the first thing I would say is that it was a bit of a journey for me to sort of upskill myself and really find my feet with that. But one of the things from a principles perspective that I've always found aligns with me in terms of my own values is humility. I think that humility is the number one characteristic, or it should be the number one characteristic of any successful leader. And I think that is sometimes a little bit counterintuitive, because when you think of the old school autocratic style of leadership, you do what I say, I just sort of tell you what to do and you follow that. It's definitely not that. And when you have your own business, you want people to join you on the journey and you're trying to bring them along with your vision. You need to surround yourself with people who have their own ideas and who contribute meaningfully to the business. Otherwise, your attrition rate is going to be really high and you're going to be surrounded by people who've got nothing to say. So that's my sort of North Star from a leadership perspective, has been humility and really sort of setting the tone from an ownership perspective, I follow a sort of set of principles that I learned early on in the business called extreme ownership, which comes from a book by a guy called Jocko Willink, who's an ex-Navy SEAL commander over in the US, and he now runs a leadership consulting business called Echelon Front, which I highly recommend to anyone who wants to sort of look into, you know, the leadership aspect and stuff. And it helped me because they've got like online training that they do. It's not recruitment specific. It's just more sort of general leadership. So I read this book called Extreme Ownership, and what the thought behind that book really is that when something goes wrong in your business, you have to set the tone and the culture as a leader by holding your hand up and saying, this is my fault and this is what I'm going to do to fix it. And again, that comes back to humility and removing your ego from the situation. And a funny thing happens when you actually do that is that, well, when you don't do it and you start blaming people, people get defensive, and it leads to sometimes quite a toxic culture of pointing fingers and name calling and people blaming each other when things go wrong, and it's not a good team environment. When you set the tone from this book called Extreme Ownership, where you hold your hands up, even when things might not be necessarily your fault, and you say, this is my fault, other people start taking ownership in the team, and they start taking ownership for everything that goes on in their desk and everything that goes on in their world. And it's a really liberating and free principle to follow from a leadership perspective, because the first thing that you think of when you start, you know, realizing how powerful this is that if something goes wrong, not just in business, by the way, this is taking this into my family and personal life as well, is the first thing I do is I look at myself and I ask myself, what could I have done better there? And that's it's like a counterintuitive switch in your brain that when you get good at it can become a real game changer from a leadership perspective. And also, you know, your accountability rises, your confidence goes up, because you're not then blaming everyone else. You're sort of looking at yourself first and foremost, and that's something that as a leader is really infectious across the rest of your team, and it helps to, you know, build culture in so many different ways.
Really interesting. I love the part about leadership being a learned skill. I think a lot of people underestimate the ability to develop that as a skill. So one of the best ways of learning is through mistakes and through errors that you've made. So can you bring it to life? Can you give me an example of where your leadership approach maybe has backfired, and what did you learn from that, and how did you take that forwards into your decision making?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right there, Martin. Like a lot of what you learn is from mistakes. I don't think we should be fearful of that. That no one's perfect, and I think if you can, like, especially in leadership, have the freedom of mind to try and fail fast, take ownership, and iterate and go from there, then it's really quite powerful. One thing about the thought of something backfiring is that I think a lot of what leadership is it's a dichotomy in a lot of different situations. So you have to give people freedom, but not too much freedom. You have to set clear boundaries. And that's just one example. There are dozens and dozens of other examples where it's this sort of dichotomy in that you have to sort of get it right. So there are times when things have backfired that I've potentially maybe not given people enough of a sort of clear intent. What Jocko calls in his books, and one of them is here, if you can see, that's called Leadership Strategy and Tactics. He calls commanders intent. So he's coming to things from a sort of military aspect, because obviously he was a Navy SEAL commander, and when you see him, he looks like a Navy SEAL commander as well. You're thinking, yeah, he's the kind of guy you'd run through walls for in a battle type thing. But if you don't set those boundaries and clear intentions at the start, people can sometimes go off track. And going back to what I mentioned about the dichotomy, if you don't make it clear about where the sort of parameters are, then sometimes people will go a little bit off piece. So there have been times in the past where I've maybe given people too much freedom, and I've not been as explicit in my instructions at the start and made it really clear for people what the expectations were. And sometimes that when you multiply that over a sort of growing team and a growing company, it can have quite adversarial effects on, your NFI performance, your sort of market penetration, your account development within certain types of clients, and also sometimes the relationships between the team members as well. So that's one example where it's sometimes something is potentially backfired, but I think it's going back to what I said. It's the dichotomy is something really important to think about from a leadership perspective, because quite often in different leadership scenarios, the sweet spot is the happy medium, and you don't always get that right. Sometimes you give too much freedom, sometimes you don't give enough freedom, and I think both can be as bad as each other in that sense as well. I hope that's answered your question.
It's interesting that you kind of focus on that balance within the business. So let's move on to that now. I mean, we know recruitment is fast-paced, it's high-pressured. How do you get that balance in your organisation between performance and driving high performance and also maintaining that engaged culture that you'd want within your business?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with a vision for me. So, everyone has to be on board with the vision of the company. So our mission as a business is to deliver the best recruitment experience possible for our customers, and for us, customers are clients as well as candidates. And anyone who comes onto the business is sort of bought into the mission as a company. We talk about the mission, daily within the organisation. For probably about 5 or 6 years now, we've always surveyed clients and candidates, even candidates who withdraw from processes or who are rejected. And we, sort of get an NPS score from that, and that's shared around the business in terms of, like the different bits of feedback coming in, and everyone sort of jumps on that and talks about it. If on the odd occasion it's a slightly lower score, which obviously we try and avoid, but those situations are obviously very helpful. Then we talk about it as a team, and that sort of helps to drive that culture of genuine, sort of inquisitive, trying to diagnose what the problem is. And going back to what I said earlier about the ownership, if it's something where maybe someone's dropped the ball, or there's a training issue that's been highlighted, then I'll take responsibility for it. We'll take ownership of it. And often what happens is the person who maybe could have done a little bit better in those situations takes responsibility for it, as well. So it starts with the vision. It also sort of aligns with the values of the company. Again, we talk about the core values. We've got 6 core values in our business, and that drives a lot of the behaviours that we promote in terms of, like, if we're promoting individuals and things like that. So vision and sort of like mission of the business, the core values of the business, really important, and then setting like a clear direction in terms of what we're trying to achieve, financially and, strategically, at a high level, and then obviously in the tactical level as well, and then reverse engineering that into what we would call sensible sort of KPIs for, each of our consultants to hit on a daily basis. Probably a couple of years ago, going back maybe 2 years now, another book that I read, as you can see, I'm like a big reader. It is a book by a guy called Gino Wickman, and it's called Traction. And that's got a methodology inside it, which we started to follow, which is worked really, really well in our business, which it's not a recruitment specific thing, but what it does is it focuses on, quarterly, what they call rocks, which is essentially your sort of highest priority task. So you start off doing like a 3-year vision, a year vision, then you break the year vision down into, 90 days, so like quarters, and every quarter you then sort of refresh those priorities, and every week you sort of meet with the team and you do what's called a pulse meeting. It's called the level 10 pulse meeting, and what your objective is to always get, everyone gives the meeting a score at the end, and you're always aiming to get to 10. Some days, some meetings are 6 for whatever reason, some meetings are 8, some meetings are 9, but the objective is you're trying to get to level 10 where everyone's really pumped and happy, and we've got the momentum and the wind in your sails. So that's how we do it. It's a mixture between your mission, values, strategy, tactics, and the sort of methodology that you frame it with. And those are the sort of the things that we sort of do in terms of how to balance drive and performance with also having that company culture. Another thing that I don't think a lot of recruitment agencies tend to do, which is part of this traction methodology, is what they call in that book is called the people analyzer. So what you do is you sort of have everyone in your business, you have every one of your core values, and you keep track of who you think are hitting those core values, and you talk about it whenever you speak to the person. It's got to be something visible. I think core values, I don't think should just be these fancy words on your website. It should be something that you live and breathe from the top down in your organisation. And you have to think about, when you're thinking about high performance culture in the business, are these people living up to the core values of the business, but also have they got, the capacity to do their job, the capability to do their job as well. And those are all part of that methodology that I just mentioned within the Traction book. So those are some of the things that have helped me to find that balance between driving performance whilst maintaining a strong and engaged company culture. And the proof in the pudding, I think, for me, in terms of that working really well, aside from the staff always telling me that we've got a great company culture in our business, which I should add is a fully distributed team, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later on, is we're part of the recruitment network. And so we have a summer retreat in the recruitment network, which is done over 2 days, and 2 summers ago, every staff member of every member within the recruitment network, and I think there's about 300 odd members of the recruitment network, or 300 agencies, and obviously lots of staff underneath those agencies. Every one of those individuals was surveyed about the company culture at their employer, and at the retreat, the results were read out, and I said to the person next to me, I think we're going to win this. And the guy looked at me like I was an alien and thought I was. I'm not saying that from a vain perspective. I'm saying it because I truly believe that we've got an amazing culture, and people tell me all the time how it's the best place they've ever worked, and how much they love it and everything like that. And we didn't win it. We didn't come second, but we came third. And that was the biggest survey done on company culture anywhere in the recruitment industry in history, because of the amount of people that were taking part in it. I think there was, like, off the top of my head, there was like several thousand, recruiters essentially, and obviously back office staff who took part in that survey. And I was really chuffed to come third out of 300 odd companies. I thought it was an amazing thing for such a small and relatively new business.
Yeah, really good, really good. One thing that's always interested me about your business, and you touched on it then, is the fact that you've been committed to remote working from day dot, I believe, so predating COVID and the drive for that.
Before it was cool, yeah.
You're also spread across multiple countries. I know you've used resource from different countries as well. How do you keep that culture then in that remote environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something you can force, to be honest. It's not something, I think there's so many different parts to it. I remember one of my friends who's an HR director, when we won that third place in the culture survey, said something about me being like a cultural architect, which I was like, I've never heard that before. But it really kind of comes from like, and the reason why I'm mentioning that is because it made me feel uncomfortable, because it's like, it's not something that I have obsessed over or tried to force, because I genuinely don't think you can force it. So I think it's something that happens naturally, and you not obviously nudge it in the right direction. But I think it comes down to really hiring people for character attributes, not just skills and experience. So you're always trying to hire the right type of personality. Hire slow and sort of fire fast, in the sense of when it's not working well, it can have really damaging effects if you let that situation, perpetuate. That's another aspect of it. So it's hiring, it's how you're managing the team. I think it's, as a leader and as a leadership team, it's walking the walk and talking the talk at the same time. So you're saying all these amazing things, but do you actually do it? Do you follow through on what you're saying? Or is it empty promises? So some of the things, when you're right in the sense that I remember when we started as a business, and we started, in 2017, so way before COVID, and I remember people on LinkedIn either messaging me privately or commenting on some of my posts, openly laughing that we were going to be a remote business. And then the exact same people reached out to me during COVID for advice on how to do it, which I thought was hilarious. And there's plenty of examples of companies, especially tech companies, who are doing amazing things with remote working. And companies have gone on a bit of a journey. They might have been remote first, and now they've gone to maybe like more of a hub sort of setup where people come to the office every now and again. And we've sort of tried to follow that. So we're a fully distributed team that in different countries like the UK and Australia, when we've had larger teams, we've tried to meet up every quarter, especially in the UK. So we still tried to do the face-to-face thing as much as possible, and meet up and do team building exercises and everything. I think that's a really, really important thing. The other side of it, sorry, going back to what I was saying about the tech side of things, a company to really look at if anyone's interested in this, who I think is doing wonderful things with regards to remote working, is Atlassian. A big tech company originated in Sydney, and they have employed someone called Annie Dean, who heads up their team all around remote working and really pushing that, and it's called Team Anywhere. And it's funny because a lot of the things that we've always said as a business, sort of we see in a lot of other sort of parts of the market, like some of our clients, for example, like one of our core values has always been recruit from anywhere, which has really helped us because we've been able to find the best people from a talent perspective that haven't just been within a commutable circumference of like one city. So we've been able to really focus on those character attributes, all the things you can't train in someone, their resilience and their, sort of personality attributes, so to speak, not just those how many years experience have you had in recruitment and how much have you built type things. So we've been able to do a lot of that stuff and really only really hire when we're really super comfortable. We've not always got it right. I must say that we have made some hires which haven't worked out, and we've probably kept a couple of people too long. because we're feeling our way through it. But it's all a sort of a learning curve. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So shift gears a little bit. So as you've scaled your business, what's been the biggest leadership challenge that you've faced, and how have you overcome that?
I think definitely the scaling up part of it has been a challenge. So there's different times in the business where you face different challenges from a leadership perspective. So the initial part was, the staff turning around to you, the first sort of full-time members of staff that you hire and saying, right, what's the strategy? And you don't have one documented at that point, because up to then it's been myself and then Dylan over in Australia, and we've been focused on the momentum, survival, getting some deals done in the first sort of 12, 18 months. But pretty soon after that, it becomes really serious, and people start asking you for what's the strategy, what's the vision, and you need to sort of like clearly articulate that, like I've said, and bring, empower people to contribute to those ideas, which I think is a massive part of the whole leadership debate. It's not just about me pushing those ideas down, it's about people actually contributing it. And that's going back to what I mentioned about humility. When someone has a great idea that's sort of like, you might think that your idea is a 10 out of 10 and theirs is like a 9.5, I would go with their 9.5, because if they're bought into that idea, they've got a much better chance of actually taking it forward. And that's where you have to sort of swallow your ego and things like that. So the biggest challenge I've had is sort of changed as we've gone through the business. In the early part, it was to do with strategy and upskilling and bringing people along in the vision and hiring and growing and scaling a team. Then the challenge for me became how to manage people in multiple different time zones. Because at one point we had someone in the Philippines, we had a team in Australia, we had obviously a team spread across the UK. We had one guy based in Buenos Aires who was recruiting into the US. We had a guy in Jacksonville over in Florida as well. So that was really challenging, because you're dealing with multiple time zones, multiple different cultures, trying to over communicate with people, trying to, like you said, maintain that culture when really you're meeting on video calls a lot. That was challenging. And then more recently has been downsizing. We've gone through a period where over the last couple of years, which I'm sure will be the same for a huge part of the recruitment agency market. We've gone through a tough period the last couple of years, and we've had to downsize. So that's been challenging, because at the start you're letting people go that might have been, sort of maybe performance has been middle of the road and not great, but not bad. And then once those people go, and you're continuing to try and survive through a bit of a lean period when it comes to revenue, and continuing to having to downsize, then you're having to let people go that you genuinely think are a real asset to your business, but you simply can't afford them. That is a really, really tough period to try and go through, is to let people walk away that that even if you were growing again, you would be pretty near impossible to find the caliber of person that fits the culture of the business, fits the values, is on board with the mission. Even if you hired 100 times, you'd be tough to sort of find those people again. And that's a real gut wrencher as a leader, to unpick everything that you've sort of built up over, several years. So the answer to your question, the leadership challenges have changed in different sort of parts of the business, and they're always sort of like difficult as each other in sort of slightly different ways. But I think you have to adapt to those things as and when they pop up, and sort of try your best to get through it.
Yeah, and I I appreciate the leadership challenge is changing over time. I think everyone listening to this will reflect on that. So as that happens and as your business grows, naturally as a leader, part of your focus moves away from the front lines and towards your staff. And you have to start thinking about developing future leaders within your business.
Yeah.
What's your strategy around succession planning and how have you managed that in your business?
Yeah, so that's been really tough. I won't lie. So like you said, when you start the business, you're very much on the tools, you're billing, and then as the sort of business grows, you're moving into more of a sort of like billing manager role with the first couple of hires you bring on board. And then the challenge really is to go from working in the business to working on the business. And I think that's symptomatic of really difficult challenges and growing pains across most recruitment businesses. I think most recruitment businesses, I can't remember what the statistic is, but they really struggle to get above 10 staff. I think a big bulk of companies are kind of, are kind of like that. So that's really tough going, to be honest, in terms of, you trying to get away from the front lines, manage the team, grow the team, and become more of a, you're not on the tools as regularly. You're obviously still meeting clients and maybe winning business and everything, but you're essentially leading the team. And that's a difficult thing. It's a difficult transition to go through. And then, as well as you're going through that journey, then having to go through it the other way as well, where you sort of like you're downsizing the team and then sort of going back more on the tools is a difficult transition as well. But in terms of the inspiration and how to develop people, what we tried to do is we put like more of a framework when we had a much bigger team, where people were essentially understood what it took to what the expectations were in terms of what we were expecting from a leadership perspective, and then what it's going to take for them to essentially move through the business and become promoted and get access to more opportunities, more responsibility, a higher base salary and things like that. So we tried to create a clear sort of pathway, like a career pathway for people, so that they understood where they're going to be in the future if they hit certain landmarks. And then it's really a much clearer conversation as you're moving through each quarter, and then to get to the end of the year, people obviously know where they're at, and it's not such a surprise when it gets to the end of the year if they've been promoted or maybe not been promoted in certain situations. So we try to make it clear for everyone, set out a pathway, and that will allow us to then sort of succession plan, in the sense that if we know or we're anticipating that someone from a senior consultant level is potentially going to move up to maybe a delivery manager type role or something like that, then it gives you time to get your ducks in a row in terms of being able to backfill that, even with potentially with an internal hire, or maybe you having to go external. So I think for us, it's the framework that you put into it. It's having everyone visible in terms of the role descriptions, what the key sort of character attributes that you're looking for, whether the person is upholding the values of the business, if they're hitting their NFI goals, if they're on the recruitment side, and making it really clear of what they have to do to be able to make that next level. And I think that makes it really much more straightforward if you are thinking about things like succession planning and developing people and inspiring them as their sort of journey through the business progresses.
Okay, thank you for that. So, talking about promotions, leadership and careers, if I could put you in the position of going back in time to talk to you in your first leadership role, what advice would you give yourself now?
That's a brilliant question, to be honest. It's a really brilliant question, and I didn't really have anyone, to be honest, where I could sort of who'd done the exact thing that I was about to to do that I could sort of be mentored by. So I wish I had that. What I would probably tell myself is to keep doing what I'm doing, believe in myself, but also go easy on myself at certain times. I can be the type of personality I am. I'm quite tough on myself, and I've got quite an obsessive, personality, in the sense that, that really came out of me, 10 times more than I ever had any other time in my life when I started my own business, because it's something, when you have your own business, you think about it from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep. And I think at times I probably haven't put in clear enough boundaries for myself on the boundary between work and family, especially when working remotely. And that's something that sometimes has led to me being on the edge of burnout. I've been snappy with my kids at times, which I haven't been proud of. Obviously, going through COVID, I had twins, pretty much newborn twins at the start of COVID, and everything like that. So some of the things that I would probably say to myself is to maybe think about that a little bit more in terms of having clear boundaries, which is super, super difficult, because I think in the beginning of a business, people talk about, I see it online all the time, people talking about work-life balance. There's no work-life balance when you start your own business. I was working 17 hours a day for 18 months, like six days a week. And that's not sustainable. But the problem is it becomes an ingrained habit. And even now I feel guilty if I'm not at my desk by 9:30. And it's such a weird thing, because it's my business, and we've been going a long time. So yeah, that's some of the advice I'd have, is more on the balance between the distinction of what's business time and what's family time. Little things like, I've always had one mobile phone which has got personal stuff on it. It's got WhatsApp with my friends, it's got work stuff, it's got Slack, it's got emails on it. If I could probably wind the clocks back, I probably wouldn't have done that. I'd probably have one personal phone and one work phone, and I'd have probably tried to leave the phone in the office at a certain time in the evening, which again is super difficult, because if you've got 2 or 3 people in the early start stages of the business, you've got deals flying and you're dealing with clients in the US, they might be on the West Coast or whatever, you kind of need to be responsive, so it's a very difficult thing to get right. But if you don't try and get that balance right at some point after the early startup phase, you end up burning out, getting sick, and not enjoying it as much as you used to, type thing. So those are the things that I would probably say to myself, if I could pop up in a time machine and talk to myself in my first leadership role.
Well, look, Chris, we've come to the end of the podcast episode. It's been really, really interesting. I've made a load of notes here, and the stuff that's jumped out to me has been the importance of humility as a leader, the importance of accountability, and I love that kind of notion of putting your hands up and saying when you made a mistake, to build that culture within your business. The importance of vision and that over communication of vision to the business. And then also, I love the line at the end, just go easy on yourself. You are going to make mistakes. Fail fast and move forward. So I think that's been a really good overview of you as a person and your business. So thank you for that. So one last quick question to you then. I talked about going back and talking to yourself, but if you could talk to recruitment business owners today, maybe they've got a small business, they're looking to scale it, or they've just started up, what one piece of advice could you give them?
My one piece of advice to anyone who's starting off now, and we talked about this right before we started recording, I think, is around time management. So in the early part of your business, I fell into this trap for the first 9 months. You're writing a to-do list. If you've come from working maybe in a larger organisation as a senior recruiter or maybe a billing manager or something like that, you're writing your to-do list with your role in mind, which is at that moment in time when you're in a much bigger company, is just sales. you don't have to think about finance or operations or marketing. But when you start your own business, that's the 4 components of any business, irrespective if it's in the recruitment industry or any other business. There's always sales, marketing, operations, and finance. If you're not careful when you write your to-do list, you could end up including things that are non-fee generating activities, so operations and finance. And if you're not careful in the early days, you end up spending too much of your time on non-fee generating activities, which slows down the momentum and might mean that you maybe don't survive with the runway that you have to get that business up and running. And I came very close to that happening to me. And the way that I solved that is when I realised that I punted everything that was non-fee generating to a Friday. So anything ops, anything fine. My accountant wants to talk to me, it's got to be Friday. And then what I would do is I'd spend Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, all of my time on those days on sales and a bit of marketing activity. And when I did that and I made that switch, the momentum came very, very quickly. And I think that's one piece of advice that people potentially don't realise, especially when you start as a sort of solo entrepreneur, one-man band, so to speak, is that you end up spending some time in the initial phase of your business on things that actually aren't going to make the boat go faster.
Yeah, great. Well, look, thank you very much for your time today, Chris. Really interesting to hear from you. We both hope that everyone watching this has enjoyed the podcast. And if you want to find out any of our Recruitment Leaders Unlocked podcasts, you can go to Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or the jumpadvisory.com website, where you can also find an overview of all of our services there. And just to remind you that all business owners and leaders have access to a free 1-hour consultancy service. So please check that out on the website as well. But once again, Chris, thank you very much for your time. And we hope to see you all on the next Recruitment Leaders Unlocked podcast.
Thanks for having me.